everybody, thank you so much for attending this session. I'm Yona Verwer of the Jewish Art Salon. I want to thank the curators, first of all, Judith, Joseph, and Dorit, Dotan. Our support staff, Cheselyn, Amato, and Chana, Wiesenthal, Elias, and of course the artist who will be introduced pretty soon by Judith. And just a shameless plug, the Jewish Art Salon has an exhibition in New York City opening December 15th. I'll put the link to with more info and RSVP in the chat real soon. Those of you in the New York area, hope you can make it. And back to Judith.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening. Welcome to the Jewish Art Salon Open Studios program. Today we will present three artists, Neiger, Hagit Cohen, and Beth Shadur. And I just want to mention that Beth Shadur and Neiger are fellow members of the Jewish Artists Collective Chicago, which Dorit and I are also members of. So shameless plug for us and our little group. Please type your questions into the chat and we'll call on you to ask questions. There will be some time for, questions and conversation. And the time is limited, so please be sure that you're asking a question. So I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Neiger. Neiger was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and received a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Carol's paintings and prints explore the connection between memory, inherited memory, and place. Carol, go ahead and share your screen, please.
All right, thank you to the Jewish Art Salon, your curators and moderators, Judith and Dorit, and Yona and team. I'm really honored to be here, and especially with my two wonderful artists who are co-presenting, Hagit and Beth. So I recently read this in an article in My Jewish Learning about nature and healing. Our role in creation is symbiotic. We are both caretakers of nature, and we can also be cared for and healed through nature. So the paintings I'll talk about today explore the power of nature to heal us and our critical responsibility to take care of our world. Christina's garden is the beginning of a series of portraits of my friends and their gardens. And my work is also about chaos in life and order in nature, chaos and order in nature and in life, and our need to connect with the natural world and our responsibility for caring for it. This painting is a series of portraits. Christina's garden is a portrait of a close friend who designed and planted her garden shortly before a long illness that left her too weak to stand or walk for many months. And here's a detail of this painting. Gardens have long been associated with women and their well-being. We seek a connection to the earth and what we can create from it. When so much of our lives seem out of control, our connection to gardens offers both beauty and respite. So the garden also carries a personal connection for me with my grandmother. My grandmother, who immigrated from the United States from Russia, found her peace and control in a family vegetable garden she created and tended. My father and four sisters and I all carried on this tradition for love of the natural world and gardening for our sense of well-being. And you can move on to the next one. Okay. And here's another close-up of the painting. And observing nature, I find that there's so much to see, so much chaos and infinite pattern and color. So I paint all my paintings twice with an underpainting that's more haphazard, throwing, painting, dropping paint, and working with chemical reactions, and then paint it again to find structure. You can move forward. Again. Thank you. So here you see a detail of Christina in her garden with reflections of branches and shadows on her skin, reflected in the pattern of her shirt and texture of her hair. I wanted her to sort of blend with the patterns of the garden. Nature creates random texture and pattern, which we constantly integrate into our lives, both literally and metaphorically. Okay, next. So the Dahlia series, and I'm going to show you two of these paintings, was inspired by my sister Sharon, who shared her love of dahlias with me. This is actually a memorial to my mother. And in her dying process, I saw her pain, but there were also moments where her beauty shone through. So forward, please. Okay. In observing dahlias, one thing that I noticed is there were always blooms that are dying next to those that are vibrant and alive. yet the dying blossoms to me seem so beautiful in their decay. So I wondered, can we find beauty in death and dying through nature? You can move forward through the next two very quickly. So this is Dahlias 2. This is another part of the series. You can kind of see both the chaos and the harmony, death and dying, vibrant and decaying blossoms there. And move forward, please. Okay. And one more time. Great. Okay, when Pesach arrived, I'm still working on the Dahlia series, and when Pesach arrived in 2020, we were adjusting to the biologically driven pandemic. There was a great deal of chaos, we all remember it, and fear early on. Passover family seders were canceled. There were other natural plagues occurring at the same time. There was, I don't know if you all remember, but hail as big as golf balls. Lakes and rivers turning blood red by pollution and bacteria. Locusts descending on East Africa, frogs emerging from sinks in England, lice, gnat, and black fly outbreaks. And of course, the civil unrest in response to persistent social inequity. Dahlia delirium was created at the beginning of a pandemic lockdown and quarantine as a response to the unpredictability in nature. Spring had arrived, but with it, the realization that nature can be both beautiful and scary, structured and chaotic, patterned and random, but one thing is for sure, we cannot control it. And you can move forward. I have another detail here. So you can kind of see, you know, how I create the paintings and how it's important for me to go through this process of the randomness in nature, but also the structure, tying together structure. Okay, you can move forward. And again. And then one more time. There we go. You can pause here. Thank you. On Rosh Hashanah 2021, the beginning of the Shemitah year, I read this commentary in the Machzor Lev Shalom. May our days seem fresh should not be seen as a plea for restoration of a formally perfect condition. We were never perfect. Rather, it's a plea for the ability to renew ourselves after moments of crisis and dislocation. As Elie Wiesel remarks, God gave Adam a secret, and that secret was not how to begin, but how to begin again. I started this painting, Begin Again, on Rosh Hashanah 1 year ago, and I became more interested in learning about Shemitah. And you can move forward. And I saw a connection to Elie Wiesel's quote. This triptych is a response to the Genesis story, the expulsion of Adam and Eve, and my interest in the Shemitah year, and its relationship to our responsibility to take care of the land. So here you see several pages from my sketchbook and the preliminary study of Begin Again, which is just a watercolor study. And then you can move forward to the next one. So this painting took me about a year to create, the full Shemitah year. And the series of the 3 canvases are broken into canvas 1 on the left, which is the idyllic Garden of Eden. 2 in the middle, original sin, the pollution of nature. And 3, after banishment, Begin Again. As a consequence of the fall, 3 relationships deteriorated between God and humans, between man and woman, and between humans and the land. The 3rd panel on the right represents Tikkun Olam, where humankind decides to observe the Shemitah year as God commands, and in doing so, repairs all 3 relationships. In my painting, the tree of good and evil is a pomegranate tree. Adam picks from the pomegranate tree, but the fruit in his hand is rotten and it spills its seeds. These seeds are metaphorical and they represent God's commandments. Adam and Eve were full of fear and anguish as the sun set for the first time after their expulsion. But the next day, the sun rose and they were filled with optimism about what they could do. And Adam begins again by allowing the seeds to propagate naturally. I think you can move to the next one. So I'll start showing you some details here. You can see the scale here, the 3 large canvases. Okay, and then the next one. Whoops, there we go. Okay, Eve, meanwhile, picks grapes that grow naturally on the grapevine. Adam and Eve live off the land, appreciating its beauty for the first time after recovering from their shame of the expulsion. The sun sets and the sun rises again. Humankind can recover and repair. This is the beauty and the significance of the Shemitah year. Adam and Eve recognize it's their responsibility to respect the land. They eat what grows naturally, and they move from fear and guilt as the sun sets. You move to the next one. Okay, so as I said before, as I mentioned, an important part of my work is the process itself, imitating humans' need to find order in life and nature. We like to make sense out of things. We have this need to make sense out of things. First, chaos and disorder, throwing paint to dripping and creating chemical reactions with paint, then creating structure around it with a second painting on top of it. So you can go to the next one, please. Okay. As you can see, I've incorporated a lot of symbols into this painting. The serpent, the tree of knowledge, water, pomegranate and seeds, grains that Adam's holding, the grapes Eve is picking, the grapevine, and the willow branches. Move to the next one, please. Okay. Why does Adam take up the pomegranate from the tree, you might ask? Somebody asked me this in Facebook, so I responded. As a viewer, you can imagine the time sequence was just days or could represent an extended period. In the third panel, Adam and Eve observe the Shemitah laws, live off the land, eating only what they need, and working to repair the earth. Eve has learned the lesson, but Adam thinks, I wonder if it's okay to eat this fruit now. It was so delicious. We as viewers see the snake that is still entwined in the tree. And in my mind, that represents that the snake is omnipresent in our lives. Take a look at the next slide. In the right panel above Adam's hand, as he reaches for the pomegranate, there's an abstract representation of the cherubim, which God placed at the east of the garden, with its flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So what happens in my version of the story? Adam does pick a pomegranate, but God gives Adam a symbolic reinforcement. The pomegranate represents life, regeneration. For many religions, the pomegranate symbolizes righteousness, knowledge, and wisdom because the fruit is said to have 613 seeds, each representing one of the 613 mitzvot, commandments, of the Torah. The pomegranate seeds spill from the fruit, representing the natural reseeding, with Adam and Eve moving into gratitude and acceptance and viewing the earth as a precious gift entrusted to them and us, and to care for and sustain. This is God's world, not ours. We are the guardians and the caretakers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Carol. This was extraordinary. And I'm going to stop the share now so that we can entertain some questions. And there was one question in the chat which asked what your medium is.
Yeah, my medium is both. The first round of painting is done in acrylic, and sometimes an oil-based canvas and acrylic on top of it for chemical reactions. And then the final painting is done with in oil painting.
I just want to say, Carol, that this was a fascinating presentation. I love your piece, the one of Eden. It was fantastic. Very colorful and very wild.
Thank you.
I agree. And I also want to add that I've been struggling. I'm working on some illustrations, and I think you just inspired me as far as how to start out with just maybe a chaotic canvas, because sometimes that white canvas is so intimidating, isn't it? I think all painters can relate to that. Hagit, Dorit, would you like to introduce her?
Yes, first of all, welcome Hagit, because you are new in our program and with the Jewish Art Salon, so we are very happy to present you today. So Hagit Cohen, Israeli-born artist Hagit Cohen, creates site-specific installations that are made with printed imagery on silk, satin, and meshed fabrics. Hagit holds a Master of Fine Art in Imaging Arts from Rochester Institute of Technology, where she also taught fine art photography for several years. She lives in Berkeley, California, and it's all yours, Hagit.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for including me today in the presentation. It's really nice to learn about the Jewish Art Salon and be included with such great artists. Before I start the presentation, I wanted to say that I've been thinking about this whole idea of the Garden of Eden and what Eden means to me. So Eden is to me beauty, and to me that's where I escape into the expansion of the heart and the joy that Eden represents, the Garden of Eden represents. And to me, like Carol said, beauty is not in its perfection. It's with the death and the cycle of life. It's the truth, really. It's about truth. The other things that I want to say before I start is that I was reading the story of the Garden of Eden as a preparation for this, and it does say in Hebrew, because I read Hebrew, that God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to work it and to be its guardian, not to be its controller, but to be its guardian. And this is our job to do, to guardian nature and not to control it. So that's, I just wanted to say those things, and then I'm going to start. In my work, I just wanted to say that I explore the relationship between human, myself, nature, and spirit, and the power of personal ritual to effect healing and change. And I wanted to say that I use beauty as a means to raise awareness to issues of the environment. Beauty is the alluring power to get us sucked in and looking at something, have a reaction that hopefully raises our awareness. So I'm going to show just a short body of work that has to do with a ritual I've done to pray for rain and water for the drying creeks of the East Bay, where I live. And what I did is I put together flower arrangements from the garden and neighbors' gardens and took to the creek and lay down the arrangement on the water, photographed the arrangement, and then I would go and at the end of this photo session, let the flower flow with the water as an offering and a prayer for rain. In this work, I use, as I say, beauty and decay. I show the fear of the dying, the brown of the water, the blue of the acidity. This is called acid rain, this group of images. And I just wanted to show that that's kind of what we have now. You can see I'm using wilted flowers to show the beauty and the decay of the creeks. That year it rained a lot, by the way. The next body of work that I'm sharing is seed pods that I collected for my hikes in the Bay Area and around the world. I loved it that wherever I traveled to, I looked for seed pods, and when I found ones and photographed them, I could feel the connection to the place. So I wasn't just a tourist, I was connected to the place. The seed pods, they represent potential for new growth and transformation. And I chose to show them in large scale. Here's an example. And to show their three-dimensionality, because I wanted to use them as symbol, like icon, for the campaign for the survival of the planet. I use them, I show how they are kind of sometimes scary, sometimes alluring, sometimes they are completely falling apart, but that's their beauty. They are very animated. In the Andean Andean tradition, shamanic tradition that I studied, everything has power, even plants animals and stones and rocks, everything in nature holds its own power and agency. And so I'm giving those pods agency to represent nature and to make us see those little things in nature that we don't pay attention to, that they are sacred, they're important, and they're a part of our lives. I love this image because it kind of reminds me of like almost like an apartment building where the tenants are peeking through the balconies, looking at us. I use a lot of the shadows in the images are very important to me as as part of the image. So it's not just the image, but it's shadow, and it also helps to ground the image into the space. I like to play with it in the studio. I kind of turn and turn and turn around the elements until I get the right angle with the right expression. This image shows how they are presented together in a show I had in 2020 at the David Brower Center here in Berkeley. And to me, they feel like a chorus. They're all talking together and singing together. This image is of an installation I did also at a gallery here in Berkeley. And I'm showing it because this is kind of an example of a contemplative space that I create, like an altar for nature, where the main image is printed on silk, and the size is about 8 by 8 feet. And it captures a moment that when I was in Aspen at the artist residency there, I walked by a tent, just a canvas tent, just very mundane structure. And it was around almost sunset, and the trees' shadow was reflected on the tent canvas. And for that moment, it was magical. The tent was, the mundane structure turned into a sanctuary of beauty. And I wanted to capture that sanctuary and bring it into the gallery. And I put in front of it an altar, a floating altar that shows the pods that you saw in the pictures before. And this is the last image. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. It was done this year when I did a fellowship with the Amman Institute. And I worked on Parashat Shmini with Rabbi Jessica Meyer. And in the part of the parasha that we focused on is the death of Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, right after they did a sacrificial ritual at the tabernacle in the desert. And that was right after Aaron did his first sacrificial ritual. And unfortunately, they were not really aligned in the way they did it. They didn't follow the instruction completely and precisely. And God's wrath came as a fire that consumed them and killed them on the spot. And both of them, and Aaron was not allowed to grieve them in public. This is clearly was very, very, it shook me to learn about this. I forgot about this, actually, and learn about this event in the Bible, that story. And this is the image I chose to represent it. And it's really important to me to end with this image, because this is how, this represents almost how far we went away from Eden. The image, the plant in this image is a palm tree frond of a diseased tree. So the palms, instead of opening beautifully and perfectly, they don't really fully open, and they're very distorted. And it was fascinated, clearly, it fascinated me, the shapes of those fronds. And when I photographed them in the studio, it surprised even me. I could see that menacing creature, kind of ominous creature coming towards me. And it felt very powerful. And so when I studied that parasha, I knew that that's the image I'm going to use to symbolize that grief and fear of going really far from the Garden of Eden. I use red to represent the fire and the blood, and I use the text in Hebrew that says, and then came forth fire from before the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And the text is kind of appearing and reappear and disappearing like the fire, and they imitate kind of the front shapes. And so anyway, I wanted to just end with the last a quote from David Brower, the environmentalist, who says, "Truth and beauty can still win battles. We need more art, more passion, more wit in the defense of the earth." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hagit. The photographs are just stunning, so beautiful. And I love the way you isolated those seeds. I can see how you pick them up and just take them to the laboratory. You call it a studio, but it looks so clean and so isolated from nature. Like, you know, like just having a microcosmos of these seeds. And it's make a whole. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. There are a lot of comments, but anybody who have some questions to Hagit, you are welcome to ask. And if not now, we can do it at the end of the presentations.
I saw one in the chat from Elizabeth. Elizabeth wants to know about your printing process, Hagit.
Yeah, printing on silk is actually very, very simple because there are places that created a special treated silk that is adhered to paper. So you print it in a regular inkjet color printer, and then you separate the paper from the silk. So it's actually very simple. You just need to know where to get those those material. But there is a factory that creates those here in the Bay Area. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about this installation in the gallery with the shadows of on the tent, but next to it, I thought I saw some of those seeds, the real ones.
Yes, that's what I did. I put on the altar, I put the real seed pods that you saw in the pictures. Yes, and that was part of the altar for nature. They're kind of living presence with me to remind me of those places I photographed them and also what they represent. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If there are no questions, Judith, we can go ahead.
Yes, actually, Richard, you had your hand raised. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I guess I want to address Hagit. In the works of the pods, no one commented on, but it seems to me that the shadows are enormously important because, first of all, by having a shadow, it means there is something else there, i.e. a sun or a light source. So they are not isolated, they're actually in context. And if you notice, the shadows make really a wonderful piece of the composition. So that's, to me, a very important part of the work. The other thing I just want to comment on is you were talking about Eden in your beginning of your presentation. But I think it's important to understand, at least from a biblical point of view, Eden is absolutely distinct from nature. Eden is where we were exiled from, right? And we were sent into nature, which we had to work and be human beings there. But there's a very big distinction, it seems to me, between Eden and this thing that we in English call nature.
Interesting. Thank you for your comments, Richard. I think we're going to move on to Beth Shadur. And Hagit, thank you again for your beautiful presentations. I've so much filling my head between you and Carol, so much beauty. Our next artist, our final artist today, is Beth Shadur. Her paintings range from watercolor on paper to monumental murals. She has an MFA in painting from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She exhibits widely and is active as an educator and curator. Her recent work was a series of watercolors about the history and ecology of the national park.
I have to say, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank the organizers from the Jewish Artist Salon, and I'm very delighted to be here with the wonderful artists that have presented already. It's a hard act to follow. And also, I'd like to thank the attendees. I see my sister-in-law is on the Zoom, so people from all across the US, which is lovely. I'm going to present a small series of pieces from the National Park Project, and this series is a continuation of my Fragility of the Sacred series, in which I have created works exploring pristine places that have been impacted by human use and abuse. That series began with my work as an artist in residence in Banff in Canada, and then as an artist in residence in Iceland. And in both places, I looked at the effect of climate change, glacial melt. And for instance, in Banff, there's a species of snail that only exists in one pond there, and they're being profoundly affected by climate change and warming. Early on in this project, I applied to the Illinois Arts Council and was fortunate enough to have received a grant to travel to the 5 national parks in Utah. And so I was able to use this time, and this was prior to COVID, but I've used this time to explore both the social and cultural history of the national parks, particularly looking at the early habitation by Native Americans before they were expelled from this land, and also how the Euro settlers that came in impacted the park, and then finally the impact more currently in terms of climate reality, industry, tourism, and things like light pollution. As a Jewish artist, while my current body of work doesn't really use Jewish symbolism, my ideas about stewardship of the earth come from the tenet of tikkun olam. I was raised to believe that our role as Jews is to take care of others, not only people, but to take care for animals and our larger communities. And tikkun olam for me also means environmental responsibility. This concept was embraced by my parents and passed down to me, and I've now passed it down to my own son, who loves nature and loves to hike. I only do paintings of parks that I've experienced, hiked, and photographed. I do lots of research, as I mentioned, on Native peoples and the Euro history, and later of the national park designation. I also research endangered species of plants, animals, birds, and fish, and as well as how now each park is engaging Native nations in their contemporary story and are beginning to take care of some environmental issues. And you have to realize that when the original parks were created, the original act was created by our government in 1916 and 64 to create and protect the national parks. Their concept was that the national parks were wilderness, but they weren't really wilderness because they had been inhabited, hunted, used for hunting, fishing, ceremonial use, vision quests by Native Americans long before that. So that idea of these gorgeous places as being wild is really not the true story of the creation of the parks. So the first work I undertook is this one here, which is called Warming Peril, and it's from Glacier National Park. And it includes many images from my hikes as well as historical images. In all of the works, I use the map, the physical map of the park as kind of the basis for the construction. And in this particular one, I use cool colors at the bottom that come to warm colors at the top, because I happen to be there in the year where intensive fire, there was an intensive fire season, probably the greatest that at that point, the greatest they'd ever had. And I was literally there when the Sperry Chalet burned. So in the center of the piece, you can see architecture that is on fire. And I actually had to hike through haze and smoke while I was there, and ended up canceling the latter part of my trip because it was too smoky. And so I never really got to see an actual glacier, which had been a dream of mine. And of course, many glaciers there have disappeared due to climate change. You can move on to the next one. And by the way, in all of these also there's text. So you can see some little square rectangles and squares that are sort of grayish. It's text that's printed, quotes and statistics on rice paper, which is then applied to the surface of the painting. This work's called At Attention from Bryce Canyon, and it depicts the many wonders of Bryce, including the early discovery by John Wesley Powell, where he meets with a Native American chief. And this land is currently threatened by our last administration's desire to restore and expand fossil fuel development. Its closest neighbor, sadly, is an expanding massive coal mine, and it's a region known very well for its night skies, allowing for unfettered viewing of many thousands of stars at night. But and this is such an exquisite and unusual place that really can't be experienced without going there. Photographs don't really do it justice. But I do have symbols throughout. I have the willow flycatcher in the center, which is endangered in many of the Utah parks, and images of Native Americans down in the lower left, and historical images. And by the way, one quick thing that you just brought it up to the right, they are actually beginning to use solar power there for the visitor center, which is great. Next one, please. The next one is from Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and it's called the Hidden Spirit. And this is an exquisite park that's really kind of a gem of the national park system because people don't know very much about it. It doesn't get visited as frequently. It has wild horses and many, many buffalo and exquisitely beautiful rock formations. But more recently, there has been a development of fracking in the area. So if you look at the area to the left and sort of almost at the top, you'll see an image of fracking. And then because of the fracking, it's led to an explosion of towns and large populations that are right outside the north unit of the park. Roads are in constant use now by large trucks bordering the park, and the night skies are polluted by light. And then for each of the national parks that I visit and research and do these large paintings of, these are essentially like 4 feet by 3 feet or close to 4 by 4, some of them 5 by 4. I also do a series of small works. So if you can move on to the next one, all of these are small pieces that address the beauty of the national parks. And this is very similar to the way that Carol looks at things and Hagit looks at things. I believe that the beauty that is there, that when people are confronted by that beauty, they'll really take care to think more clearly about becoming stewards of these landscapes. And so for each national park, I do a large number of very small pieces. All of the works are in watercolor. This is quite a small watercolor, 14 by 13, called Little Mo. And you can move on to the next one, please. And this one is from Arches National Park. This is an area that has amazing history. You can see the Native American history and pictographs down on the right. You can also see some history of, and those were done by very ancient people, Native peoples. There's a spotted owl to the left. That's an endangered species at this park and some other Utah parks. And this particular park is known for its delicate cryobiotic crust. That crust has taken thousands of years. It's the surface of the ground. So if hikers go off of the trails, they in one step can damage thousands of years of natural growth that took place. Visitors who stray off that path, it's a terrible thing to do. And if you see in the lower area of this piece where you're now showing the owl, just to the right of that, there's actual signage along the trails that shows that. Other threats here include the development of oil and gas lease of lands, which would provide all types of pollution and overuse by tourists, and introduction of various non-native species, which crowd out some of the native species to this land. And in 2017, the National Park Service actually completed an ethnological study of Arches National Park that will guide their management of the land, and they have included various tribes that they invited to participate. So essentially, the Native understanding of the meaning of these lands will be incorporated into future use and help visitors to be enriched by embracing those values of respecting and living integrally with nature. You can go on to the next one, which is a small detail, again, a small painting to show, this is called Arches Tour, small watercolor. And on to the next one, please. This one is from Mammoth Cave. This was the last park that we visited before the pandemic, and it was actually just starting to take place. And this Kentucky landscape where this cave is acknowledged as sacred by the Shawnee, Yuchi, and Cherokee nations. It's the largest of all cave systems in the world, and it was designated as a park in 1941, but it has a very unusual history. It does have early history of use by Native people who used the cave entrance for shelter. And they also used it for ceremonial purposes. But because saltpeter was actually present in this cave, the cave became a source of gunpowder. And so the earliest people to go in and actually work in the cave were African-American slaves. And eventually the wonders of this cave became known and people began to flock there. And some of these slaves actually led the earliest tours of the caves. Well, strangely enough, some of the current, sorry about that, some of the current guides are actually descendants of those early slaves. And so this park has had a very strong presence in African-American history, and the African-Americans that came were not allowed to stay in the hotels that were around. So in the very lowest right corner, it shows a particular resort that was opened by an African-American family to allow those people to come and visit the park. The park is threatened by a variety of man-made problems. It's got a very fragile ecosystem, and it's threatened by groundwater pollution, invasive species, and nearby industrial development. In 1981, it became a World Heritage Site, and solar panels are being used near the visitor center. And if you go on to the next one, I'll show you one piece from that park. This is the interior, which has water running through it and various formations. And this is actually titled wrong. This piece is called Crystal River. Another piece is Drapery Room. And if you move on to the last of the national park pieces, this is from Yellowstone. It's called Sublime. And of course, it's known for its beauty. And recognition of threats to this park took place as early as 1975 when the grizzly bear was listed as threatened. And then in 1995, gray wolves were actually restored after they had been almost decimated by ranchers and hunting. And that created a very positive environmental success with the reintroduction of those animals. Many of the park animals are actually impacted by a lack of continuity of the land, so that there's protected land, then they move on to unprotected land and back to protected land. And that makes it very difficult on animals such as bison and so on. There are problems with a mine company wanting to move right there and develop a huge mine that would endanger the quality of water in Yellowstone, as well as increase traffic and noise and light pollution. There are said to be 1,600 cultural sites within the boundaries of Yellowstone. And so now the tribes have requested to participate in resource management and decision-making, and to conduct ceremonies and other events in the park, and to collect plants and minerals for traditional uses. And in 2018, the park began to consult with associated tribes to increase opportunities for non-consumptive ceremonial use of the park. And you can go on and show the last two, which are the details from the park. And while you show those, this is Cistern, one of those hot pools that you see in the park. And then last The last one is also from there. These are formations that are formed by salt and minerals that create these beautiful pools. And it's obviously one of the most beautiful places on earth. But I wanted to sum it up by saying I've also, for this series, visited and painted Capitol Reef National Park, Canyonlands, Zion in Utah, Black Canyon in the Gunnison in Colorado, and just came back from the Grand Canyon, which was amazing. And as I said, this series began prior to COVID, but the shutdown, the trips were interrupted. And so because of that time in isolation, I spent many, many hours researching and painting and have completed over 60 pieces in this series since 4 years ago. In addition, recently I've gone back to Iceland and planned works related to the environment there, and glacial melt there threatens to destroy all glaciers within 100 years. Volcanic eruptions are increasing and threaten not only the natural but the built environment. And we have witnessed in the recent past numerous terrible storms, wildfires, and other devastating climate catastrophes, and it only will get worse without our taking on climate reality with great fervor. Our stewardship of the earth proves increasingly important. I want my work to address this alarming circumstance by expressing the wondrous beauty of the natural environment while reminding us of its fragility. I do believe that making art that reminds others of this idea of stewardship can help influence thoughtfulness and change like a stone in a pond, causing ripples that reach outwards. We each singly have to act responsibly with our single drop that eventually, communally, can become a tsunami of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. And as you were showing your work, I was thinking about how can we as artists impact what's going on in the world and how can we affect change? And you addressed that just perfectly in your remarks as you wrapped it up. So, and I think that that speaks for all of the artists who presented today, certainly. So I'm just looking into the chat to see if anybody has questions for you. There's so many accolades and so much praise for all three of you artists, and I will save the chat for you and send it out.
Yeah, I also said that this was, Beth, it was beautiful. Your water paintings are amazing, and it was like a journey going back in time somehow, and connecting with those tribes. This is so important. We forget where we come from. I mean, everywhere, but specifically in America, those natural parks, and who was there first and how they preserves the area, and what we are doing to it today with all these tourists and everything. So this was very important and beautiful. And I want to say to all of you, the artists, I mean, I saw the chat and everybody talks about all of you as a whole, about the subject and the art that you presented. It was completed each other. It was beautiful and meaningful and very, very powerful. And you showed the fragility of nature, and I'm thanking you for this. It was just, I really enjoyed it. I could listen to you and see more and more. Thank you.
I also want to make a point. I often think about, does it matter? Does art matter? What we do? Does it really impact anything? And, you know, in a negative sense, you can find out that it really does, because invading armies, they steal the art from a nation. And they also are very much interested in censoring artistic expression. So if it didn't matter, the powers that be wouldn't be looking at it. So it does influence people. Beth, go ahead. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I just wanted to say that I really very strongly believe that art makes a difference in people's lives. And I do a whole presentation on socially engaged art. And one of the points in the presentation is, if you remember back when we were going into invade Iraq, and Colin Powell was presenting this idea that we were going to invade Iraq, at the UN, there was a tapestry behind him of Guernica, and they actually covered the tapestry because that tapestry depicts the horrors of war. So it shows you that even the government understood the importance of the art. Not that they funded enough, but you know, but
That's a really good point. So Guernica would be something that might give people pause as we embark upon aggression internationally, even if it's, you know, I'm using the word aggression, but let's say a military campaign that's more neutral. Chana raised her hand. Let's hear from you, Chana.
Well, so, you know, good morning and thank you. The presentations were really fantastic. What struck me most in a thread through all of the presentations was this sense of boundary. It was all, to me, it hit as a defining of boundaries. So whether it's the boundary between life and decay and that process in the flowers that we saw, or the seeds and the understanding of this boundary between, you know, potential that's encapsulated and recognizing that potential and then what that potential can become, or in this last presentation as well of, you know, real physical boundaries, like whose land is this and what does it represent? To me, that all ties back to this sense of what is Eden, what is the Garden of Eden that we were, you know, that man was placed within, and where do we define that boundary? How do we define that boundary, and how do we honor or respect boundaries? So I want to thank everybody because I thought that the presentations were just incredible and very, very, you know, rich and really got me thinking. So thank you.
Speaking of boundaries, I'm reading a book right now, and she begins the book by describing maps and boundaries. And she says boundaries are those things which tell us who to hate and who to love, because they're just artificial lines on a map. It's the Island of Missing Trees. Let's see, the author is Elif Shafak, and so far I'm enjoying it very much. But yeah, I think that's key. And Beth made, I think it was Beth that made the point that, you know, we have this notion of this unspoiled wilderness, which is so untrue, because the fact is there were people living all over it and using it. And there is no place on earth, very few places that are unpopulated or that never were populated. People get displaced. So, you know, we need to put that right out there. Richard, did you raise your hand?
If anything, I was going to say exactly what you just said. Wilderness is an odd concept. Obviously, there are people using less populated areas than, you know, in contrast to more populated areas everywhere. So, right. But on the other hand, the thrust of the basically Teddy Roosevelt, who interestingly enough is now a very controversial figure, of course, but he was a naturalist and he was the force behind these setting up this park system, as far as I know, and it was for good. There's no doubt about it. You know.
Yes, thank goodness for what he did, really, because you know, so much was preserved that, and it's always under pressure for exploitation to this day. So there needs to be a great, you know, there's an expression in Hebrew, siag Torah, which is a fence around the Torah. You know, the idea that you safeguard your heritage by practicing your religion, by doing mitzvot. And in a sense, you can extend that to safeguarding the natural world, you know, to make a siag la'olam, you know, a fence for the world. Dorit, did you want to have any?
Yeah, Regina would like to say something.
Oh, good.
Go ahead, Regina.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I have a comment about the last one, Beth's. For those who look at it, they may not know what it means. So when you present your art, I think it's Beth, is there ever an opportunity for like a sidebar that shows what each symbol in the painting means, so those who look at the painting and can't hear your explanation could understand it a little better?
Yes, thank you for that question. Each painting is presented with a large panel of text next to it, not the little ones, but the big ones that have the symbols and references. And I talk extensively about them. So some of the material I presented were tiny little excerpts from that big text that's presented with them. So yes, people have the opportunity to really read about it in catalogs that have been done of this show, because the show has traveled quite a bit. The text is included as well, but thank you. Yes, I feel that's very important.
Thank you. And do you also maybe include places where they could contribute their money, time, and energy?
Ooh, that's a great idea. I love that. I'll have to add that to the panels. I think that's great. The National Park Foundation, and there's all kinds of things. I also give to Native American Rights, and which is a legal organization for Native Americans. But yes, that's a great idea. I love that. And I have a show of this work coming up at Space 900 in Evanston, just a small selection in February, and I think I will add that to my text. So thank you for that.
So thank you everybody for being here presenting Carol, Beth, and Hagit. It was just wonderful. And I just want to tell you that Judith is going to send you the chat, so you're not going to lose it, because there are beautiful comments from everybody. So our next and also you can find all the programs at the Jewish Art Salon channel on YouTube. So you have, this is going to come up later, but you can have all the other videos, programs from the past 2 years. So you are welcome to watch them. Our next program on January 29th, featuring Jewish Art Salon member Paul Salomon, which is here with us. Hi, Paul. Who will present his conceptual photographic work and book, Inventing the World. So please join us on January 29th. And thank you, everybody. And we want to thank Canvas that is supporting this program.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And also in New York, if you're in the New York area, December 15, please go to our website and for the info and RSVP for our exhibition in downtown Manhattan.
Thanks, Yona.
Thank you, Yona.
Hey, Paul, good to see you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll see you next time, end of
Thank you.
January.